Welcome back to episode 2 of the Authentic Christian Podcast. Episode 1, we started on dinosaurs, and episode 2, we're going to continue. So episode 1, we talked about why it's important to talk about dinosaurs, and episode 2, we're going to talk about what the Bible text says about it. So Scott with me, Tucker, I'm Aaron. Let's get into the text. So let's look at Job chapter 40 and verses, chapter. I said that in the intro. I said Job chapter 40. And then I started to say in verse, and I was like, I don't want to say the verse. So when it came out on the introduction topic, I said Job 40 and verse 41. And somebody texted me. They were like, I can't find verse 41 in Job. I'm like, yeah, sorry. That's my bad. So in Job chapters 40 and chapter 41, in chapter 40, it starts about verse 15. And this is God challenging Job. And he's basically making this argument, like we said at the end of the last episode to Job. He's saying, Job, look, I'm powerful. I'm majestic. This is how much power I have. Don't question me. And then he's going to talk about these two like crowning, I would say animals, crowning dinosaurs, crowning dragons of his creation. And so you can look here in verse 15. You guys want to read it? When do you want to read the text?
Sure.
40 verse 15. Go for it.
Look now at Behemoth, which I made along with you.
Day 6, made along with you. When? Day 6. Genesis 1:25. Okay.
He eats grass like an ox. See now his strength is in his hips, and his power in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword.
Yeah, that's good enough for now, I guess. We could read all the way through verse 24. But the gist of it is as you go through. Now, look, if you want a really in-depth, every single verse, this book I just got a couple weeks ago and read it last week and skimmed through it again. It's called Behemoth and Leviathan. It'll be in the Linktree resources. Dave Miller wrote it. It's really awesome. It basically goes through and just looks at all the arguments, whether they were real animals or not. Some of the stuff we've discussed, but in more depth. The words behind it, the Hebrew words, because Job's written in Hebrew originally. It's in the Old Testament. Just all kinds of different arguments about, what animals are. It's actually got study questions too. So if somebody wanted to teach a class on this or use it for your curriculum, you could. It's called Behemoth and Leviathan. But in there, he talks about different things like, look at verse 17 of Job 40, right? So honestly, if I wanted to be really argumentative, which I can be sometimes, you guys know that, I'm going to start at verse 15. Look at behemoth, all right? Now that word that's like the only time I think in the Bible that word is used, all right? I like the footnote in this New King James I have. It says, a large animal, exact identity unknown. Thank you. Thank you. You don't know what it is. A lot of footnotes, I know the NIV and some of the other translations will say like a hippo or an elephant, right? Which, okay, let's be real. If you're making this in the 1600s and you don't have a lot of extensive fossil records of these giant dinosaurs, what's the biggest animal you know on land? An elephant, a hippo. An elephant's the biggest, but you start looking at it where it says he eats grass, all right? It talks about him lying in the reeds and marsh, verse 21. Verse 23, the river may rage, he's not disturbed. So some guy a couple hundred years ago that doesn't know about dinosaurs would say, maybe it's an elephant, maybe it's a hippo. And I don't blame the guy. I'm not trying to be too hard on him. But look at verse 17. He moves his tail like a cedar. A cedar is a tree, right? I mean, you can look this up. An elephant and a hippo, what do their tails look like?
I mean, relative to the animal, they're pretty small.
Yeah. They're little. They're like,
yep.
Kyle says, they don't even make a good switch. That's what he says in the AP videos. I've listened to it so many times. But he's talking about this animal, whatever animal it is, swings its tail like a cedar, right? Some people have different size, cedars, depending on the type of cedar in the Bible lands. But, I mean, some people say it's like 60, 80 feet tall. Some people say it's like 130 feet tall. Either way, when you look at a long-tail, long-necked dinosaur, like a brachiosaur, a patasaurus, or a titanosaur, what does it swing its tail like?
Like a cedar.
Like a tree. It's huge, right?
I mean, it's a large tail.
It's a huge tail, right? And also he says, look at verse 19. He is the first of the ways of God. What do you think that means? Is it the first thing God created? No, because it wasn't created till day 6.
Right.
What do you think he means he's the first?
One of the biggest.
Yeah.
I mean, he's behemoth.
Yeah,
he's
behemoth.
He's at the top.
Yeah. I don't know what that word means. I have written in my Bible down, king, strongly beast. I don't know if that's what it means or not, but maybe that's what some of the dinosaurs named after are. But the chief of the ways of God, the first of the ways of God, biggest, strongest on land, just one of these things you look at and you're like, wow, God is powerful to make that. And that's sort of God's argument to Job. Job, who are you? Can you make these different animals? Do you know when the eagle mounts up in its nest or whatever it says? Who is this? You see this gigantic animal, right? And if you're Job, it makes sense to be like, yeah, wow, I do know that animal. It's massive. And I actually preached on this recently at South Haven, and I showed some pictures. You can go look on this website, database.org or something. It shows you all of the fossil finds around the world. And they found in the same area where they believe Job lived, they found Titanosaur fossils, which are like the biggest sauropods, the biggest long-tail, long-necked dinosaurs ever. So like, now they could have been put there by the universal flood, but the fact of the matter is the Bible tells us there were these animals and Job knew about them.
Well, it talks about in verse 23 of Job chapter 40. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he's not disturbed. He is confident that the Jordan gushes into his mouth.
Yeah, there you go. I read the biblical land, the Jordan, right?
Yeah.
So what you have is you have this idea that there's a massive animal that God says is a real animal. Otherwise, like we said, just get rid of your Bible. If you're going to say it's mythopoetic, how do you know Jesus isn't mythopoetic? I'm not trying to be like too rude, but every time I deal with somebody that says, well, that's just figurative, I'm like, look, there are parts in Bible text that are figurative and it makes sense, whenever, the Lord is using something in, some of the apocalyptic books, like the Lord rides on a swift cloud, Isaiah 19:1. He's not saying he literally rides on a swift cloud. He's saying God's coming in judgment, right? There are plenty of places where it's supposed to be that way. It's clear that the text is being figurative. This completely defeats God's argument. If his argument is, look at this massive animal, right?
Yeah.
So it's speaking of a literal animal. And the fact is, if we look at these dinosaur fossils, what does it look like? Well, that would fit pretty good.
Yeah. And I mean, he's not necessarily embellishing, right?
No.
I think he even talks about the ostrich in the previous chapter.
Yeah, he does.
And he talks about it being, I
think it's chapter 39.
Doesn't he say it's kind of dumb or something to that effect? He's not embellishing is my point. Like he's being accurate about the description of the animal.
Yep.
He would do that throughout the text if he was trying to just trump himself up.
Yeah.
He wouldn't be like, I made this one over here. It runs really fast, but it's kind of stupid.
Yeah. That's right. Genesis 39:13 through 17 is talking about the ostrich. It says, God deprived her of her wisdom. She leaves her eggs on the ground and she forgets a foot may crush them. She treats her young harshly. Like, he's describing these different animals,
Yeah.
Yeah.
While y'all been reading these verses, I got the Apologetics Press Study Bible, and there's a chart, and it does compare like the hippo elephant to the dinosaur, if it matches all those like descriptions. So it's pretty cool. Y'all should go check it out. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, that is cool. All right, so let's let's move on to the second one, Leviathan. Right, this one I think is really, really cool. So Leviathan starts in chapter 41. All right, now this description is longer. We're not going to be able to read the whole thing. But if you want to open up your Bibles and you look at Job chapter 41, verse 1, can you draw out Leviathan with a hook? My footnote in this version of the New King James, a large sea creature, exact identity unknown. Thank you. That's exactly right. We don't know exactly what it is. It's not a crocodile. So in this book, one of my favorite, the quotes that I really wrote down, Behemoth and Leviathan, he's talking about the naturalistic explanation to some of these descriptions. And there's one where it says, let's see, out of his mouth go burning lights and sparks of fire shoot out. It's 18 and 19 around there. It's talking about basically that this was a fire-breathing, like water dragon, if you want a sea serpent, right? And they're trying to explain this naturally. And one of the people says, well, it's a crocodile. And maybe in the morning when the sunlight is shining, as it opens its mouth, a bubble forms and the sunlight catches it and it looks like there's fire coming out of its mouth. And Dave said something like, are we supposed to believe God is trying to wow us with crocodile blowing bubbles?
I feel like that's harder to believe.
It's harder. I mean, it's harder. It defeats the purpose of God's argument.
Yeah.
And so when you look at Job 41, when you're talking about Leviathan, I mean, it's talking about this like sea creature that breathes fire, right? I mean, someone says that's ridiculous. I mean, the electric eel produces electric that can like kill a human.
Yeah.
Well, that's ridiculous. Well, God made it. And honestly, once again, that should not be, you shouldn't be that surprised that God has the power to make an animal that can breathe fire if he did what?
If he made everything.
He made everything. Spoke the universe.
Why is chemistry unfathomable in something like a large reptile?
Why?
But completely believable in insects like the bombardier beetle.
Bingo. Two chemicals mixed together and it spits out this like boiling hot liquid.
Yeah, we have poisonous animals. We have, I mean, even even like the duck-billed platypus has venom.
Yeah.
You have animals that make thread, silk, things like that.
Yeah.
So why I don't understand. But I think I know why. I mean, honestly, I'd suggest that the reason why people have a hard time believing it is because it's usually presented to them in a media format that is fantasy.
That's right.
They
like
see the movies, they see the TV shows, and they think, oh, well, you know, those are just movies. They're just fake. They're fantasy. So anything that could be based up, that could be based on that's real, like it's got to just be, it's not real. It's not real. So I think that's the reason why people struggle with that. But it's believable.
Yeah.
If you look at the animal kingdom, there are many animals that do extraordinary things.
Yeah.
Sometimes with chemistry.
Yeah.
This would be the same thing.
I think this quote will really accompany what you're saying. It says, if an electric eel can produce 500 volts of static electricity that can kill a grown human being, and if a bombardier beetle, you know I'm going to mispronounce things in this season, that beetle can fire a chemical bomb that explodes from its body at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, why would it be difficult to believe that Leviathan can breathe smoke and fire?
Yeah.
I think that's cool.
The beetle mixes two chemicals, and when it expels out, it's like boiling hot liquid. Why couldn't they be two different chemicals in a dragon or a dinosaur that whenever they come together, it's not that hard to believe. I'm telling you, if you believe the Bible, if you're a Christian, you are a supernaturalist. You believe in miracles or you're not a Christian.
Even too, like if we love watching movies like The Hobbit and those things, like this is kind of exciting to know that these things did exist at some point.
Yeah, they probably weren't like
crazy.
I mean, they're exaggerated. Like they probably weren't whatever. I don't know how a football field long, flying and burning whole cities. No, it's exaggerations, right? Yeah. But if you look throughout all cultures, right? It's like the flood. When you look throughout all cultures, what do you see in every culture? Stories of a flood. Some sort of flood. Like Native Americans have a cultural like tradition about their ancient relatives that hollowed out a log and 8 people were saved from a global flood. That's exactly like the Bible. And so when people say like, well, the Babylonians had this Gilgamesh epic about a flood destroying the world and one man saving mankind. It's like, weird, why? I wonder if it's because it actually happened and all cultures have basically legends of it, if you want to call it. And so that's literally what that book about dragons deals with. The Chinese culture, one of the most ancient, right, has an animal for each month, 11 of them, and then what's one?
A dragon.
A dragon. Why? Did they say, you know what, let's just let's mix it up on month 12 and let's just make up a fake animal? I mean, it sounds crazy, but I'm just saying, like, when you look at this, that's what it looks like. Like you said, it looks like who? Godzilla.
Before the show, I said, to me, it really does. When you read the entire chapter and it's talking about the waters boiling in his wake, like, I mean, you know, just picture the way that you have a wake behind a boat or something moving quickly underwater. It shoots up those bubbles. That's what we're talking about. Something large enough and fast enough in the water that when it swims, it creates that turbulence behind it. And I don't know.
We're not saying it's literally Godzilla. Yeah. We're not saying that. What we're saying is it's a reptile that can breathe fire. We don't know how much. Maybe it's a little bit, right? But what we're saying, we're not saying that you're going to walk away and say the Authentic Christian Podcast guys think Godzilla's real. No, that's not what we're saying.
Exactly that. But but he does swim fast. He is big. He is strong, and he breathes fire.
That's right.
He makes everyone afraid of him.
Yep.
And I mean, if you read that, you can't stab him. You can't shoot him with arrows. You can't pierce him with swords. You can't use spears against him. And it says he's king over all the children of pride in the final verse, which is, you know, that's why I said that. I said it jokingly, but I mean, it comes from a place of, you know, that kind of makes some sense. Maybe, you know, not Godzilla, but like
a large
animals
reptile
like this would be the inspiration for those kind of stories.
And it's not just in Job that you find this term Leviathan. I mean, in Psalm 104, you also have a very similar context where God is making the case. The Psalm is about worshiping God, how he's mighty, majestic, deserves honor. And it lists a bunch of real animals. And then in Psalm chapter 104, in verse 26, it mentions Leviathan. And in verse 25, it talks about him living in the great sea. So it's a sea serpent, right? I'm going to look some other verses. In Psalm 74, 13 and 14, it mentions Leviathan. And then in Hebrew parallelism, it has another sentence that says the sea serpent. So Leviathan is called a sea serpent. It uses that same word, tananim, that's in Genesis 1:21. And then in Isaiah 27:1, it talks about Leviathan. And it says the great dragon, which is the Hebrew word tannin, in the sea. So it's basically the Bible says it lives in the sea. It is breathing fire. Isaiah 27:1, some English translations say dragon, but it's this sea creature, right? I think it's likely one of those dinosaurs. Maybe we don't have fossils of it, but you go look at some crazy dinosaur fossils that we found in the ocean. There's some terrifying looking animals.
Man, there's terrifying looking animals that are alive in the ocean.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, just now, and we haven't even found them all, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not a big stretch,
Yeah.
at least for me. It seems plausible that there's an animal fossil record somewhere that we haven't found
Sure.
that would match this.
But even if you go look at like plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs and all these different like dinosaur fossils in the ocean, there are some of them that are terrifying, you know?
Yeah. I
And
mean,
like,
even just like super crocs, like you ever look back at the prehistoric
oh yeah, and like
versions,
megalodon
like
as
they-
the shark,
like they
but like
call
the
it.
super crocs back then.
Yeah.
I mean, the most recent Jurassic Park they had, was it the one that ate the T-Rex, or the one that ate that like fake made up dinosaur, the one that came out of the water, Kronosaur maybe. There are some crazy fossils. If you go look that up, I don't know if it was like that or if it was something like you said that we don't have undiscovered. But if you go read Job 41, it literally is saying there's this massive sea creature, right? That I believe was probably a dinosaur. Well, why is it not called a dinosaur? The word didn't exist. So we got about 12 minutes left. Let's quickly, somebody would say, all right, well, what about those being on the ark, right? Because if they lived with man, they'd have to be on the ark. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I would recommend this book. It's called Flooded. Jeff Miller, the son of Dave, who wrote this book, Behemoth and Leviathan, they're both PhDs, wrote this book, Flooded. And it's awesome. It talks about, dinosaurs on the ark. A couple videos we'll reference in the podcast resources. The Titanosaur, the largest one, its egg was like the size of a basketball, right? And so, okay, if you guys are putting animals on the ark, would you take full-grown, mature animals, or would you take young ones?
I think that's your first thought, is they took the grown animals, but why couldn't they have taken an egg?
Yeah.
I never thought about that until we were discussing this.
Or even like an infant.
Yeah, or a little one. Yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't you? Well, I mean, what are some of the advantages?
It's smaller, takes up less space, it's easier to care for, it uses less food.
Less waste.
It would live longer.
Live longer. After they came off the ark, what were they told to do? The humans were told to multiply and fill the earth.
Yeah, I mean, the animals would need to essentially do the same
Do
thing.
the same thing.
And
so why wouldn't you take an 80-year-old dinosaur that dies at 90 on the ark? Because it has 10 years to try to reproduce? No, you'd want to take something young.
And not only that, we haven't mentioned, but he was to take one from the different kinds anyway.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't take every specific subset,
Mm-hmm.
you want to call it species.
That's right.
Of types of animals.
That's right.
So
yeah, he took kinds according to their kind.
How many different versions of giant long-necked dinosaurs did he really have to take?
Yeah, maybe he just took one.
Right.
Yeah, I mean so. You can get more information on that. In the last 10 minutes, let's talk a little bit about what would you expect to see in history if humans and dinosaurs did live together? Because the Bible, I mean, I'm convinced that's painting that picture that there are these dinosaur-like creatures that are extinct now but existed back then. What would you expect to see in human history if dinosaurs and humans lived together?
Well, I wrote down a note like you'd look for proof of humans and these dinosaurs living together.
Yeah.
I wrote down a note while we were studying. It's like we do have these fossils that prove their existence, but also we have these like carvings and moldings and drawings of these dinosaurs that are created. So it's like, is it a coincidence? And I know we're about to dive into that more. It's like, did they see them? Like, how did they just come up with this? Like, did they just say, oh, here's the bones that we talked about? Like, did they just make a figure of bones, or the molding of the scales and like the spikes on the back? Like, if you don't just make up a skeleton of a cat and then form it into a cat of Play-Doh or something. But like you have to see something to kind of get an idea. So
yeah, if you had never ever seen it before in your life, you've never seen a cat or a dog ever, picture of it, nothing, and you just have the skeleton, you're probably not going to draw that the way it actually looks. I mean, even today with our modern tech, we see revisions of the way we think things look based on their skeletons. So yeah.
And so what we're probably not going to have time to talk about all these examples, but like if you watch these videos that we give you in the podcast resource page, there's lots of videos that go through lots of examples. Cave drawings, Kachina Natural Bridge. It looks like a long-necked dinosaur, but it's from like the Kachina Indians, I think, or Anasazi Indians, lived from like 150 BC to like 1000 AD or something like that. I'm not a history major on that. But
that sounds right.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But the Indians lived, and you're like, wait a minute, how did they draw this cave drawing of this long-necked dinosaur unless they saw one? Well, let's say somebody says, well, they dug up fossils. When you look at some of these depictions, they're more accurate, knowledge-based than we knew.
Yeah, it's like, how did we start to try to depict something. I think it was maybe Triceratops or some versions of that.
Sure.
Where we thought it had a smooth back.
Yeah.
And
okay, long tail, well, Triceratops too, but
yeah,
like when we think of brontosaur, we think smooth back, right? Well, in 1992, a guy named Stephen Cherkas basically like gained some fame because he found fossilized skin impressions that showed us that the long tail, long neck dinosaurs had spikes on their back. They weren't like Brontosaurus. It wasn't smooth back. Well, we've been drawing them smooth back for like the whole history of us finding these fossils. Why? We never saw one in person. But then you find some of these ancient figurines, like the Vladimir Julesrud figurines, the Ica stones, all of these like ancient 1500s and earlier depictions, and they have long tail, long neck dinosaurs with spikes on their back. It's like, how'd they know?
Yeah.
We didn't know that.
That's right. And I mean that kind of proves that they had knowledge then that we didn't rediscover until recently.
That's right.
And we did it with all the tech and expertise and PhDs that we have now. Why would you reasonably assume that they would be able to do that then?
Yeah.
With that information that they had available at the time.
Yeah.
Unless they had real life information. They were seeing it or were speaking to people who lived in an area that had those.
Well, that's like Tucker said too. Somebody said, well, maybe they dug up fossils too. Well, number one, they never depicted them as bones. They depicted them as living. Like the way when I drew a dog, I wouldn't draw a dog skeleton. I would draw a living dog because that's how I see dogs.
Yeah.
These ancient people never drew like skeletons. They drew like humans riding them, like some of like Triceratops type things, which is kind of crazy. People say, oh, that's impossible. People train elephants.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to the show today. We'd like to mention you can download these episodes. They are sponsored by the Gospel Broadcasting Network. We have an app available. You can check that out on Apple or Android devices, and you can stream and listen in to the show and get answers to life's biggest questions. When bones were found of animals over in like Greece and things, what'd they do? They turned them into mythological things like Cyclops.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They completely missed the mark on what it looked like.
Yeah.
So,
or like Godzilla, you know?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. But I mean, what you have is you have all this evidence, and we don't have time to cover it. Research the Ta Prohm Temple for yourself in Cambodia. Research the Ica stones. Now, yeah, there are some Ica stones that seem to be later that were faked. But the original ones have, I think Jeff Miller said, patination, oxygenation, things that are...
they have the microbes that would have been present.
Yeah,
like
stuff you can't fake.
Yeah.
Look up the tomb of Bishop Richard Bell.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah. So you want to tell them about it real quick?
Well, I mean, it's basically a tomb in Carlisle Cathedral, and along the brass or bronze, whatever plate, then the engravings down below it, it has depictions of long-necked dinosaurs. That's cool to me, because that's more recent history. And so it's like, well, they were still seeing some remnants of these up until, hundreds of years ago, not thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
So that's.
I think too with that one of them has like 4 spikes on its tail, 2 pointing forward and 2 backwards. And people were like, why does this long tail, long neck have spikes on it at the end of its tail? Kind of like a different, like Ankylosaurus or something like that. And I think it was like in the 70s that they discovered this dinosaur Shunosaurus. Double check that because there's a lot of information flying around in here, and sometimes you gotta check it all. But that had spikes just like that. It's like, how'd they know that these long tail, long neck had spikes on their tail in like the 1600s, which is when he was buried? I mean, how'd they depict it? Believe it or not, they probably saw one.
Yeah, why don't we have pictures of knights, like artist renditions of them fighting dragons and things like that?
Oh, yeah, all the way through Roman history, all these different histories. China, all over the world.
You have the Greeks have some.
The Mayans, all these cultures on the world. People putting spears through these 3-toed, like dinosaur looking, like raptor looking.
Yeah, the Ica stones show them fighting shield and spear against what people would call like a raptor sized, dinosaur.
Yeah. Anyway. And people just think it's crazy because that's not what we've been fed our whole lives. Yeah. And I get it.
Gotta be fake. Gotta be fake.
Yeah. It took me years to sort of like put all this stuff together and be like, really? But when you basically take all the stuff you've been fed, like evolution, and say, okay, what if it's not true? And you look at all this evidence, there's no other explanation for it other than people came along with Darwinian evolution a few hundred years ago and said, how do we disprove all this? Well, we have to say it was millions of years, and we have to say all this other stuff that shows humans and dinosaurs living together. Well, it was just interpolations or they're fakes. I mean, you see all this stuff when you start digging into the evidence, but I don't know.
Yeah, worldview definitely affects the way that you go about that. It's just like that. What was that case? I know we don't have much time, but they found some.
Oh, the figurines? Okay.
Yeah.
So Vladimir Julesrud figurines in the 40s, he was in Cambro, Mexico, maybe. Yeah, and he found these figurines. He sent them off to have them dated. When the dates came back, the dates were like, oh, these are 4,500 years old, like 2,500 BC. But he only sent figurines of like humans and horses, whatever it was, stuff that we see commonly. Then after he got his date, he sent figurines that were like dinosaurs, like long tail, long neck with spikes on their back, right? He found them in the 40s, way before we knew this, other types of dinosaurs, and said, oh, by the way, I found these with the ones you already dated for me. And they were like, well, no, we take our numbers back. Well, why? If they found these statues that are 4,500 years old that a human made of these dinosaurs living, that would mean that they probably what? Saw them, right?
Which takes us full circle back to where we started in the first episode on this, talking about showing that dinosaurs lived with humans.
Yeah,
would shake the foundations.
That's right.
Of evolution.
Yeah,
and that's because it's the poster child of it. So much of what we are taught, and so much of the examples that we're shown in school growing up, and other things like that, are built upon this image and idea of, here's what happened to the dinosaurs. This was hundreds of millions of years ago. And then the whole world got wiped out and started over. And we could have never even possibly existed at the same time as them.
Yeah.
Don't even consider it. They're just cool fossils. We'll talk about it. It'll be a good way for us to teach you evolution.
And there's so much, like, get this book flooded. We talk about macroevolution. When we talk about like these layers are millions of years, this is millions and millions and millions, and you have a tree that runs straight through all of them. You're like, was that tree standing upright for 20 million years? No, it's likely because it was laid down in a global flood, and there's evidence to support that. It's in this book. Look up some of the fossils. Like Mary Schweitzer found a T-Rex fossil that had soft tissue in it. Like, it's not just that T-Rex. Tons of other fossils have been found. They have blood vessels and blood cells that aren't fossilized. And they say, wow, it's a miracle. It didn't fossilize after 70 million years. And I'm like, or it's not 70 million years old. Maybe it's just a couple thousand years old and it was deposited in a great flood. And that sort of thing is not an isolated incident. It happens quite a bit. So, well, we got about a minute left. Really quickly, C14 dating. So a lot of times they'll say, well, these dinosaur fossils are, millions of years old, right? C14 degrades over time. And C12 doesn't. So carbon 14. You just compare the ratios, right? And you can basically find out how old something is. When you get to about 50,000 years, it's really hard because the C14 is so, like, there's so little of it. But when you look at dinosaurs, if something's 1 million years old, just one, not all of them before 60 million years. If it's 1 million years old, you'd expect all the C14 to be gone, right? Guess what happens when you do C14 dating on lots of dinosaur fossils? What? There's lots of C14 still in it. They actually had one bone of a hadrosaur. I don't know how you say it exactly. But they tested it. They sent it off to be tested blind. And the testing came back. They didn't tell the lab it was a dinosaur. And the testing came back 6,000 to 7,000 years old, which is, according to the Bible, how old the earth was. It had C14 still in it. So there's so much evidence. We cannot cover it all. It'd probably take us 15 episodes. But on the podcast resource, we're going to give you lots of videos, stuff to read, so that you can dive into it yourself and realize that the biblical account is true. Yeah. Dinosaurs did live with humans, and we survived. Yeah. Anything you guys want to say in the last 7 seconds?
No, just go look up these resources, do more study.
Look up the resources, do your own study, test everything, and thanks for watching the Authentic Christian Podcast. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Authentic Christian Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by the Gospel Broadcasting Network, or GBN for short. You can hop on the App Store, search Gospel Broadcasting Network, and you can download the app. And there's this show, many other great shows that you can watch or listen to, and start learning more about the Bible and why we're here, what our purpose is. Thanks for listening.